The Rise of Skywalker, Episode 9, and the third episode of the Disney Star Wars trilogy, and probably, hopefully, its last. So in this review, I will not tell the spoilers right away. I'll give you a basic overview of how the movie was, and then I'll let you know when spoilers are coming. I just saw The Rise of Skywalker a few minutes ago, so completely unscripted, I'm going to give my review of this film. Hopefully you stay the whole time. Unless, of course, you haven't seen the movie yet, and once we get to the spoilers section, just pause the video, go and see it, and come back and finish it then. So, how was the movie overall? It was good. It was pretty okay. Now, this is already considering the fact that Rian Johnson's attempt at making a Star Wars movie, I think he's a fine filmmaker, he's got a lot of great ideas, but he was not the right person for the job in the 8th episode of Star Wars. But there are plenty of commentaries about that. Some people like it, some people like it a lot. Most people despise that movie for a lot of reasons. So one of the biggest problems is that this trilogy was not made by one person. Nor is it even made by a committee of people who were trying to make some kind of decent series. It was made essentially by two people, J.J. Abrams for the first and the last one. So J.J. Abrams set up a lot of really interesting things, questions, CPOs, Red Arm. Oh, well, we'll let you know how that goes in the spoilers. What does that all mean? How does that all make any sense? Well, we don't get to find out in the second movie because it's this one long, rather annoying pause in the story. Well, that forced J.J. Abrams and everyone with him for this third installment to actually take all the potential story threads which should have been explored in the second movie, that is in Episode 8, and cram them into Episode 9. So overall, the movie feels quick, rushed, but given the annoyance that a lot of us felt watching Episode 8, a lot of things are resolved. It's kind of quick and fast-paced. There's not a lot of time to breathe. That's overall the biggest complaint. I mean, one can complain about the decisions, but at least this is not a movie which is intending to leave you hanging forever. It's a movie which is trying to resolve a lot of things, give satisfaction. A lot of leitmotifs, especially musically. John Williams' score is brilliant as always. A lot of leitmotifs visually. Callbacks is another way to call them. Fan service is another thing to call them. It's fan service, though, is something cheaper. I think it was pretty good how everything was tied together, all to bring some satisfaction. And I think it did that. Now, there are quite a few problems, and one can disagree with a lot of the choices, but we'll get that into the spoiler section. Overall, should you go see it? If you're a Star Wars fan, I think you should see it. If you watch Rise of Skywalker right after having seen The Last Jedi again, The Last Jedi, which is, well, either you liked The Last Jedi and you'll probably be happy with this movie, maybe, possibly, hopefully, or you just detested The Last Jedi, or somewhere in between, seeing that movie and just cinematically, logically, story writing-wise, The Last Jedi was so unbelievably poor that it's unbelievable it had so much money and so many people behind it. Again, it was one writer, one director. Normally that would be a good thing, but the man had a different vision. His vision was, as we have seen in many other places and many other reviews, to create something where some people would like it and about half the people would really hate it. He literally wanted that to happen. That was his dream. He achieved it. Good for him. That's a cinematic kind of artwork, I suppose. It just is unfortunate for us. So, if you watch The Last Jedi again right before seeing this, have that bad taste in your mouth, this will help clear the palate, I think. My recommendation is, go see it, enjoy it. With those expectations nice and low after seeing Last Jedi, this should feel like a breath of fresh air. Now, for spoilers. It turns out C-3PO's red arm was the key to everything. Just kidding. That's one of the threads that never gets resolved, but meh. The opening title crawl tells us that Palpatine has returned in some form and has broadcast by radio that he's going to take over everything. It's nice of bad guys to let him know you're coming. The rebellion has been trying to rebuild. We see and can infer that a sufficient amount of time has gone by since the previous movie, which was good because in between episode 7 and 8 was, I think, a couple days at most, or a few hours, which was a very, very bad choice because it limited the potential behind-the-scenes character development that could have happened. The first two scenes show us that Palpatine is indeed back, and he's got lightning. We'll see more of him. And Rey is training. How is Rey training? Well, we discover in the movie that Leia, we discovered by the end. It's interesting. This retconning is pretty good, actually. Leia trained with Luke as a Jedi. Apparently, she got pretty far through the training, and then for some reason stopped in the middle. Okay. But who knows why she didn't want to go any further, but this explains her in-touchness with the Force, how she was able to space fly like Mary Poppins and all that. So, all of that is helpful. Carrie Fisher's presence in the movie I thought was tasteful, as was the exit of Leia, the character's death towards the end of the movie. All that was good. At first, it just seems like Rey is training herself based on some sort of interesting obstacle course near the Rebel base on a forest planet, or in a forest on some planet. But it's understood later that Leia is really the one training her, and it's interesting because Rey comes back, she didn't finish the course, and she gives the lightsaber back to Leia, saying, I guess it must be, she remade Luke's lightsaber again, unless it's another blue lightsaber, but that's what I understand it to be. And it says, I don't deserve this yet. And then it's like, danger, attack, something's happening. And then Leia gives it to Rey, and Rey holds on to that lightsaber for most of the movie. Kylo is seen finding some sort of green trapezoidal thing. Looks like a Romulan device of some kind. And is able to use it. We learn later that this is a Sith Wayfinder. Only one of two ever created, apparently. Which is able to bring Kylo Ren to the Sith planet called Exegol. I looked up the spelling. And that is where Palpatine sent his message from. So Kylo was able to get there. He speaks with Palpatine. And Palpatine... this whole scene I thought was pretty good. We have a lot of lightning flashes. Whatever this planet is, I don't know if it's some sort of especially large planet. A gas giant. It has a surface, though. It's kind of vague, but... it's fine. It works very well as a setting. Flashing lightning. We never get a really good look of Palpatine's face until the last few minutes of the climax in the end of the movie when he's, we'll find out. Mostly in shadow, we get glimpses of things. We see things that look like they might be cloning chambers. Later we see a whole kind of army of, I assume, clones of Palpatine or something, or of generic Sith people things. They're all cloaked and we never really see them, but it's fine. We get the impression that he has some kind of a plan. Now, an important question is the presence of Palpatine. Does this invalidate what Anakin Skywalker, that is Darth Vader, did at the end of Return to the Jedi? Oh, I just call different ones Jedi now. At the end of Return to the Jedi, when he threw Palpatine into the pits. Kind of. It's okay though. If you kind of go with it, it's all right. Not my preference, but it seems to work for what's given. It's also important to note that this movie looks very good. It sounds very good. The sound effects are excellent. Star Wars, as I recall, in '77 won some awards for sound, and rightly so, in addition to its other special effects. This movie has a lot of quotes from previous ones, including Palpatine saying at this point to Kylo, natural. Speaking of the dark side of the Force. And that's where a giant fleet of Star Destroyers, like, I don't know, hundreds of them, as far as the eye can see, emerges from somewhere on this planet. And this giant fleet doesn't end up leaving the system yet. I don't really know what happens, but somehow Kylo is able to then bring the First Order back to this place later after he tells them, like, hey, Palpatine's got a whole bunch of ships that he wants to give us to take over the universe. And it will be called the Last Order, or the Final Order. Yeah, that's what he wants to call it, the Final Order. Instead of the First Order. Okay, these names aren't great. I looked up the whole rebellion, resistance, First Order thing. apparently, as the First Order rises previous to Episode 7, between 6 and 7, the New Republic is weak and not interested in taking out the First Order, and maybe, who knows why, and Leia is the one that ends up leading the Resistance, which is like a kind of vigilante thing. And then, of course, the Republic is mostly destroyed in the first of this trilogy, and so forth and so on. So hopefully that helps understand. I needed to Google that just to understand what was going on in the first two movies, because Rian Johnson didn't answer any of those questions, but that's fine. At the end of the conversation between Palpatine and Kylo, Palpatine warns that Rey is not who she appears to be. And Kylo's like, oh, who is she? He's like, and then Palpatine just smiles, and you barely see his face because it's mostly in shadow. His eyes are all bulgy and half dead because he's a zombie, apparently. We don't really know how he came back to life, but it doesn't seem to matter. And he just goes, We get introduced to some things we saw in the trailer, like Kylo remaking his helmet. The seams of his helmet that he had smashed are now glowing red. That's cool. And the people that help him remake it are Cornelius and Zira from Planet of the Apes. At least it looks like that. You see chimpanzee muzzles inside masks. I don't know if they're the Knights of Ren or what, but it doesn't really matter. We do see the Knights of Ren finally. They just seem like professional soldier types, paladins or something, which are guys who accompany Kylo Ren on various little adventures. So we're skipping back and forth between our heroes and the villain side, and the rebels or rebellion, the good guys, are getting ready to leave the planet. Rey receives the lightsaber from Leia, like I mentioned earlier, calls her Master. That's interesting. Master Leia. This is the retconning where Leia has been trained in the ways of the Jedi apparently this whole time. Well, that's great. Between Poe and Rey, along with Finn, there's this, I wouldn't really call it a love triangle, but we get to see what probably should have been extensively in the second movie, which is a kind of either love triangle or tension, romantic tension between Finn and Rey potentially, and Poe and Rey potentially. None of this is resolved. It's more than a little unsatisfying. Not really great. Basically, the whole movie, he has multiple occasions to say that, oh, Rey, I love you, which is kind of how he seemed to feel in the first movie, and the second movie had that weird adventure on Canto Bight with, what's her name, with Rose Tico, all of which was just tragic and a shame, and Rose saying the most idiotic thing possibly ever to be in Star Wars, and that includes Misa, whatever Jar Jar said in any of the prequel movies, which was, we can't win by destroying the things we hate, but by saving the things we love. While in the background, the laser cannon is destroying the things that they love that he was trying to say. Makes no sense, and he has that shocked look on his face. It's really amazing. And all that shock and horror that we feel as an audience, I'm quite certain that is what Rian Johnson intended. It's brilliant that he was able to manipulate us to feel that way, I guess. Yeah, sure. But based on what he seems to have intended, that seems to be exactly what he wanted. So, good for you, Rian Johnson. Thanks. And spoiler alert, oh yeah, we already did that. Finn never declares his love for Rey. Poe ends up not expressing any kind of feelings of affection. They seem more like brother and sister, which works just fine. The three of them would have been a really good team. Like in The Force Awakens, we see that the three of them, plus Kylo as a weird fourth wheel on the tricycle, have this interesting bond and chemistry and interaction. Almost all of that is just ruined by Episode 8, but here we see it packed in again. Like I said, it really feels like a lot of things from, if we were to compare it to A New Hope, Empire, Jedi, it feels like Empire and Jedi stuff are really crammed together here in the beginning to develop these characters, since they were so underdeveloped in the second of the two movies. Right around this time, Poe says to Rey, why are you here? You're wasting your time. We're just doing all this training. You should be with us out there. We're fighting. And says to her, you're the best fighter we have. Oh, great. That's amazing. What? How did you go from scavenger who could do pretty well taking care of herself to the best fighter we have, I guess, physically. And we end up seeing this demonstrated, thankfully, later. Because of the training she's been doing and because of her innate abilities. By the way, Episode 8, Luke Skywalker, the Force isn't merely something that exists outside of the Jedi. Obviously, Jedi can have, apparently from birth, innate powers. So it's a little bit more than as you described Episode 8 Luke, but we don't have to see him again, thankfully. We get to have an Episode 9 Luke as a Force Ghost, and he's much better. By the way, all of those rumors you might have heard about Palpatine coming back and the 6 endings that were filmed, I can't vouch for that, but the ending they chose was the ending they chose. And Rey being Palpatine's granddaughter, all of that is true. It's true. All of it, as Han Solo said. All of it is true, so I'll just spoil that for you now. That's why she's so powerful. Now, retroactively watching it at the time, because I watched this just a few minutes ago, just got home, recording this now, no script, just my barely legible notes that I wrote in the dark without even looking at them. She is a Palpatine. Okay, so her being a Palpatine, thinking back to the other 2 movies, because the complaint was often, all right, well, she seems to be a Mary Sue, because we're not, as the audience, given any reason to understand or appreciate why she has so much ability, why she could defeat Luke Skywalker in a duel, why she could do so well in all these things. And she, had some mistakes, but what I really like about this movie is finally Rey going from a character which is great actress, I think, but a character that's rather underdeveloped and doesn't really have any particularly negative traits to make her interesting. Now she becomes interesting because the implication here is that she is going to turn evil as a certainty because she cannot help it, because she is a Palpatine. And at one wonderful point, one of the better scenes, I think, she ends up having a vision, something we saw in the trailers, where we see her as an evil Sith or something. That's her seeing herself. I thought that was effective, well done. You get a little jump scare at one point where her evil self scares the real Rey. That was pretty good. That was in the throne room of the Death Star, which collapsed into somewhere in the Endor system. Apparently not Endor, or I thought it was all a forest, but apparently there's a lake or ocean in it too. How the Ewoks are doing is not explained. So this gives her all of this power and all these things that we would see as virtuous, as good, but in fact, it's a curse now. Now she's actually filled with these evil traits too. We do see her have a new Force power, one which I think is fine. It's well introduced. You have introduction and payoff later, good basic cinematic storytelling, unlike the previous movie, where there's an injured serpent creature, and she goes to heal it, and she's like, well, how did you do that? They say, because she's with the gang. He says, well, I used some of my life force to do it. Oh, okay. Well, so now we know how that works. That ends up paying off later when, in a very good lightsaber duel, I thought there were at least two really good lightsaber duels in this between Kylo and Rey, and the first one was through force projection, which was really interesting. I thought that was especially good, very well filmed, very well choreographed. It wasn't the lifeless choreography of the prequels. It was, nor was it the somewhat uninteresting choreography of, say, Episode 4 of the lightsaber battle between Vader and Obi-Wan. This one was really very nice, very interesting, and there's something behind it too. We're starting to be invested in these characters. Kylo is at that particular moment reveals to Rey that you're a Palpatine. Your parents were nothing. Yeah, your parents were nothing. This retconning is great. Yes, your parents were just filthy junk traitors, but now I know the truth. And here it is. You're a Palpatine. You're his granddaughter. It's like, I think with having a real second movie in this trilogy instead of what we got, and giving the chance to turn this movie into 2 movies with really good character development, a chance to really get close to these characters would have been great. Because at the end of the second movie, it's just like, oh God, I don't care about any of these characters. So little this makes logical sense. Whereas in this movie, it's trying to do so much damage control. It's working really hard. They clearly saw all the problems of Episode 8 and were doing everything they could to fix them. And I appreciated that. They're working hard. It's a good movie. There was the scene where the Stormtroopers can fly now. They can fly now, says 3PO, whatever his name is. And they can fly now. They can fly. You know, looks a little silly. And that's probably my biggest complaint in this movie, and goes for all three. The comedy for most of the movies isn't great. The thing that made me laugh the most in this one was C-3PO. He had some really good lines. I actually laughed aloud. But the other humor in this movie, like in The Force Awakens, was like, it's kind of cute, but it's a little bit too much of breaking the fourth wall, a little too much self-referential. And it's difficult because Star Wars is so imbued now in the culture. It's difficult not to feel that and to kind of try to lighten the mood. But what it does is it ruins the sense of tension instead of building up tension. Like, say, take a dramatic series which takes its time, like Mad Men or Breaking Bad. Occasionally there's something to laugh at in those shows, but for the most part, there isn't. It's deadly serious. And there's no reason it needs to be too serious. A lot of comedy comes in the original trilogy from Han Solo and Chewie and this kind of silly things that come out of the real frustration of their times, not these quips that happen, which from Leia, from was there one from Palpatine even? From pretty much every single character. Hux, thankfully, is pretty sober in this movie instead of the ridiculous Rocky and Bullwinkle caricature he was in Episode 8, thank goodness. Oh, by the way, has anyone noticed that Poe Dameron's character, Oscar Isaac, and also the actor for Hux were together in Ex Machina, a really good film with lots of tension and suspense and mystery. So the humor overall, of course, in Episode 8, it was just insanely bad. There was a couple things that were worthy of a laugh. In Episode 8, for the most part, it was truly bad. One thing that was a good callback, there's a lot of understanding in this movie, and it's so difficult for it not to be. It's awareness that Episode 8 ruined so many things that it had to fix, like Luke throwing away his lightsaber suddenly, which was just for a laugh. Red Letter Media rightly noted that the structure of Episode 8, written by Rian Johnson, was really more like a comedy. There's this comedy of errors where, just like Clark Griswold in National Lampoon's Vacation, things keep getting worse and worse in that movie because of the decisions they make, which just end up being bad decisions. And that's the structure of a comedy, and very often played for laughs. So, in the beginning of Episode 8, Luke Skywalker throws his old lightsaber away, Rey retrieves it, and Rey ends up throwing, it's really strange, the cut. She's suddenly on the island where Luke was living on, that in Episode 8, the old First Jedi Temple Island, somewhere in Ireland, wherever they filmed it. And there's a fire there that is the fire of the TIE fighter she flew in there with, which we don't see exactly, so it's a little confusing how she got there. Or maybe I just missed it or closed my eyes. And then she throws the lightsaber into it, but then the person who catches it is actually Luke Skywalker's ghost walking out. And this time we get a good version of Luke Skywalker. He seems much more like himself. It's still a little bit comical. Luke from the original trilogy was never so self-aware. I mean, Mark Hamill's such a much deeper actor now, and he's played all these interesting roles like voice acting for the Joker over the years, that he's grown way beyond 1977 Luke Skywalker. And that shows, for good or bad. Nevertheless, I thought his portrayal was much more Luke Skywalker than what we had before. And when he catches the lightsaber as a Force ghost and brings it back to Rey, he says something like, a Jedi just doesn't throw something like this away, which is great. That's a little nod to all of us who hated the fact that he threw the lightsaber away in the beginning of Episode 8 for a cheap laugh. So while the comedy is bad, I think the chemistry between our three main characters is especially good. And moreover, they all have a maturity which was not seen in the second movie. It was very much stifled by the writing. The writing here allows them to have a Luke, Leia, Han Solo kind of vibe. Though really all three of them are a little bit more like Han Solo, a little bit charged in their comic delivery, but when the comedy does land, or when you see it in their actions, their frustration with one another, it's really good. It's real enjoyable. So at the very end of the movie, when the three are embracing, we appreciate that. We feel like, oh, okay, these are actual friends. They've had more than 48 hours to get to know each other, like we had in the first two films. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it was a very compressed time span. Whereas here, they've been together for what seems like years. Rey is much more mature. She's very confident now. That fits her. Before, she had all these powers without much confidence or seemingly experience. And that was a problem. It didn't really fit. Now, with the confidence and being just really good, like the beginning of Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones is amazing in all those things, right? But we're introduced to this character who tells us who he is because he's good at what he's doing. And now Rey is good at what she's doing, and she has this confident, not overly cocky personality. Finn also seems rather sober, mature. He's not nearly as timid or freaked out. He's rather confident in what he does, the decisions he makes. All this is pleasing to watch. These characters have a combination of flaws, including Rey now because of the evilness in her. And it's by far not perfect. It would have been better, I think, for J.J. Abrams to have done all three, especially to be involved with the writing, the crafting, instead of the speed bump we had in the middle. So after they can fly now, the stormtroopers, that's a fine little chase fight scene. That's fine. This is okay. And then Rey is attacked by Kylo Ren. Kylo doesn't want to kill her. He stated that he said through their telepathic communication that he wants to have her join him. And they talk about that many times, like, I want you to join me and that kind of thing. And there's this implication that they may come together in some way. So Kylo goes down there with his TIE fighter. She wrecks it with just a jump and a lightsaber. It's a pretty impressive move. Kylo obviously wasn't going to try to kill her anyway, and nor was the attack on the TIE fighter lethal, though that's hard to believe. I guess they have really good crumple zones in those TIE fighters. Nice airbags in them. Kylo's fine. He walks without any extra scratches on him, from what I could tell, from the burning wreckage of his TIE fighter. At the same time, the First Order, I guess, or Last Order, whatever order, has captured Chewbacca, and the rest of the gang is there, and they're not able to save Chewbacca. And what we see, which is the important part, is Chewbacca's on a First Order transport, which is flying up into the sky, just taking off, and then Rey is there. Kylo Ren's walking up. Rey uses her super strong force powers to keep the spaceship from going to space. I thought it was well filmed. It was kind of exciting because, oh, wow, at last she's pretty powerful, and I believe she has this power now. Meanwhile, Kylo, he walks up and he tries to push it away, and Kylo reveals later that this was his plan to show to Rey what she really is, because Rey keeps forcing it, and we saw in the previous movie when they were fighting over the lightsaber how it split in two. Now this was fixed later, apparently, between the movies, but that was this is kind of not a callback, it's a reference to that. It's referential, and I like that. So because what happens, well, the ship's going to split apart, right? Well, what I like is, instead of leading to an expectation and then dashing it completely like Rian Johnson did, J.J. Abrams leads us to the conclusion that it's going to split up, and then suddenly, out of her anger, Rey, with Palpatine-style Sith Force lightning, totally shreds the transport that Chewie's on. She's like, no, Chewie! And then it explodes and it falls to the ground. And she's like, ah! And we're like, oh my god, Chewbacca's dead. Okay, another character dead. And that was a pretty good death. Sadly, Chewbacca's not actually dead. I mean, I like Chewbacca, but there was a little bit, oh, I guess no one will die. Okay. And then they go off. The Millennium Falcon has been captured at some point. We see it total. There's a lot of stuff that happens. And I'm not telling you exactly in order because my notes are not super clear, and it's if you're caffeinated, it's pretty easy to follow. It's only 2 hours 15 minutes. I thought it was gonna be like 3 hours or something. It's not bad at all. I wouldn't call it well-paced. It's rushed, but it's definitely not slow in any part that I remember. But if you've been watching the episode 7 and episode 8 recently, you should be fine. The revealing that Rey has this evil in her that will cause destruction, whether she kind of willy-nilly like this, whether she wants to or not, is great. I really like that. So the desert planet that they're on, the reason that they're there is to follow something Luke and Lando were... Oh yeah, we saw Lando. I forgot to mention Lando. Lando appears. For some reason, he's exactly where they're going. And he's like, oh, you want the thing that we were looking for? Well, we got this far, and then we didn't go any further, so good luck. And he kind of helps them, and it's pretty good. It's like, oh, that was Lando. Wait, why was Lando there? Okay. And they find this dagger. It looks like Sting from Lord of the Rings, which is fine. And it has writing on it. It's in a Sith language. C-3PO speaks the language, or at least he can read it. But he can't translate it because he's programmed not to be able to translate the evil language. Oh, great. I guess the Sith language is the black language of Mordor. So be it. Actually, I got a lot of Lord of the Rings vibes from this, and also Game of Thrones vibes, generally in a good way. Game of Thrones vibes, not so much, because that series was just crushing everything that should have been over 4 seasons into 8 episodes, and this was crushing 2 seminal episodes of a Star Wars trilogy into just 1, so similar to that. But the Lord of the Rings feeling was good. So C-3PO refuses, because he simply cannot, due to his programming, refuses to give the translation of what's on the dagger thingy, because the dagger thingy tells them where the Sith Wayfinder is, which will help them find Palpatine. Okay. Shiny object. Just follow the shiny object. Don't pay attention to how bad the previous movie was. And so he can't do that. So in order, they have to take him to a planet called, was it Kajamil? Just please write in the comments what it actually is, because I haven't bothered to look it up. Like I just said, I just got back from seeing it in theater. And they have to go there because there's Poe knows on that planet. Generally, they're sympathetic to Resistance Rebellion folk. I assume it's in the Outer Rim. It doesn't really matter. And moreover, they have someone there who does black market droid mechanic stuff, where they force a protocol droid, in this case, to go against his programming and then tell all. That sounds way worse than if I was watching it. So they do that, and there's a tiny little guy there who's like, he was a cute little thing, like 2 inches tall, reminding me of the little alien of the Orion's Belt alien from Men in Black, the first movie. And he will be able to retrieve what's in the firewalled memory bank or something, but doing so will erase his memory. And then they say, oh, but doesn't R2 store his memory? His Katra, if you will. It's a reference to Star Trek 3. His Katra is stored in R2-D2, apparently backed up in there. It's like, oh, which makes a lot of sense why R2-D2 is always hanging around this gold guy, because apparently it's a parasitic relationship where C-3PO is downloading himself into R2 like an external hard drive. Who knows what R2 gets to do to preserve him, because nobody cares about the non-anthropomorphic droid. Oh, and before this, though, they get on this planet, there's like snow or something. All this is really well filmed. We get to see when the gang gets attacked by some people that Rey is definitely a real badass in how she handles herself. She protects everyone. And at this point, she still hasn't been revealed to be Palpatine's granddaughter yet, so at first it's like, oh, she has to be so powerful. Okay, but she's been training, and we saw her do some pretty nifty stuff in her training in the beginning, so it's like, okay, it's all right. I mean, this is going all right. It ends up, I enjoy it more now, knowing that, okay, she's definitely Palpatine's granddaughter, so she's a superhero, basically, in her abilities. Now, what's one of the most interesting new characters here, because Poe is not even really a central main character, right? He was quite peripheral in the first movie, a little teensy bit more he was present in the second, and here in the third one, we get to find out that he used to be on this planet. He mentioned before he got there, I didn't really do so well with one of the people there. Well, we kind of figure out that it was some old girlfriend, where they were spice traders. Apparently that's like, oh, a spice trader. It's like some kind of a drug dealer or something. But we actually don't even really see her whole face because she wears not a Mandalorian mask, but a mask pretty much the whole time. We see her eyes at one point. She's the character is voice acted very well because we just really hear her voice. She's interesting. She's demonstrates she has a history. She's got a chip on her shoulder, kind of like Poe. So they have a thing going on, which is it's quippy and it's good. It's pleasing. And later they talk kind of about run away with me. She says later, and he's like, nah, I'll stay loyal to this cause. Oh, that's nice. That's good stuff. Poe is a very promising character in the first movie, and I feel like he got his due in this one a little bit more. Finn does not. It seems heavily hinted through the movie that he's a Jedi, or he has Jedi blood or powers, because he can sense when certain people get killed at points and when they're in danger, and that's never explained. So, okay, whatever. Not a great choice. A new droid is introduced because why not? Right next to BB-8 is just some kind of a wheel with a cone face who stutters. His name is Dio, like Cassius Dio, or the idol of Jack Black. Dio has rapped for a long, long time. Tenacious D. Why does 3PO have red eyes? Because after his memory's wiped and he has the red eyes, says the Sith message, and then memory's gone. It's restored later, but it's cute. You get to have this first meeting later with R2-D2 because R2 was somewhere, I don't remember where. And they meet. It's like, pleasure to make your acquaintance. C-3PO. Human cyborg relations. And then he was like, me. And 3PO's like, what? Your best friend? I've never met you before in my life. It's cute. I really liked the two droids here. They've been the constant characters through all 9 movies, and I think they acquitted themselves well here. At some point after this, it's so confusing to try to remember when. There's a lot of stuff that goes on, a lot of jumping around. Not so much to the detriment of the film while you're watching it, because I think you could follow pretty well, better than in, say, what's a good example? Rogue One, where the locations are super unclear. With this one, I think there's more locations, but something about it, it's easier to follow while it's happening, and you don't feel like asking too many questions. Well, in any case, Rey ends up getting drawn to where Darth Vader's helmet is on Kylo's destroyer, but Kylo's not there. And then Kylo appears. They're still having the telepathic communication thing, even though Snoke is dead, who was apparently facilitating it. But Kylo tells Rey at some point, we're a dyad. And that I had heard mentioned before by some other theorists. And they have this dyad. I don't know if it's because one is light, one is dark. That's what Snoke said to the second movie. As you grew stronger, your equal in the light will rise as well, and that's okay. So there's a light, there's a dark, there's a balance. They fight together, people die. Jesus, okay. But I like this scene. I like it a lot because of the tension that's building to find out, where is Rey really from? Because Kylo knows, and he tells her that you're really the daughter of the children of Palpatine. Wait, both of them? I guess just one or the other. The father, I would just guess, but I don't know that for sure, are Palpatine children, and they were as junk traders were living that life to protect Rey from Palpatine, even though he was dead, and yet not dead. It's fine. The lightsaber duel that ensues is combined with this tension, and there's still dialogue with it. I thought it was really good. That was definitely a highlight for me. And then Kylo figures out where she is because they knock over the platform, which is holding Darth Vader's helmet, the melted helmet one. And so then, even though they're fighting each other through force projection, it's very interesting, or telepathy. And then he's able to see it, and then he's like, and then he goes there. Oh, also we have teleportation more than a couple of times. It's established earlier when Kylo finds out where she is on that desert planet because she has a necklace which is from that desert planet, and they analyze it. So it's not just image like the water we saw teleported before. I don't know why the dice disappeared at the end of episode 8 that Leia had been given by Luke, but whatever. And then there's another standoff between the two of them where Kylo tells Rey, when Kylo arrives there in person, we're a dyad, we belong together, and all these things. And she's like, I did offer you my hand, but it was to Ben, not to Kylo. It all works. So apparently there's a spy, and that ends up being Hux. And Hux is the one to save the gang, and then I don't remember how, but Rey gets off the destroyer, and they all end up together. I think on the Falcon, yes, on the Falcon, somehow later. So that's good. Hux is then killed rather unceremoniously by one of the other generals. They get to the Endor system. There they meet a friend. They see the ruins of the Death Star, which is sitting in a lake or an ocean or something. The waves are really cool. Great big waves. It reminded me of something like perhaps it's on a world which has a gas giant as its parent planet, and the waves are really high because of tidal forces. I thought that was a nice touch. It was really seemed like a pretty dangerous looking sea. That all looked pretty good. There's a person there who was they were all First Order, and they all rebelled, their whole company apparently, and Finn gets to make contact with this one woman who's their leader. And that's nice, so he gets some people to relate to. So some character development for Finn, which was, again, sorely lacking in Episode 8. Using some mysterious property of the blade, basically quoting, say, friend and enter, melon. Rey is able to, just without telling anyone, she goes over to the remains of the Death Star, gets right to the throne room, and has that vision I mentioned where she sees her evil self. Kylo shows up, he's able to get there too. Okay, great. And they have more discussions about their whole deal. I thought it was very good. It ends up turning into the lightsaber duel, which we saw in the trailers, where they're fighting kind of at the water. And I thought this one was also really good. Visually, it was well done. Because there's tension behind these characters now. We know a little bit more about them. It has more meaning. So a lightsaber duel is like, say, between Darth Maul and Obi-Wan and Liam Neeson isn't super interesting if we don't have any reason to care about these characters, and certainly about the bad guy. But here the bad guy's really a protagonist, much more than Darth Vader ever was from the beginning. The conclusion of this is where Leia is these are explained, I think, by Maz. Oh yeah, Maz Kanata's there. She's with the rebels, and she says something to the effect of Leia's trying, I think it's her, trying to reach out to Ben to bring him back to the light, and that it's taking all this strength. Basically, this is an excuse to explain why Leia will die of force exhaustion, like Luke Skywalker did a few minutes later. But she's able to get into Ben's head and really bring him back enough to the point where he turns off his red lightsaber. And then, and he drops it. Rey grabs it, turns on the evil red lightsaber, and just right into his gut. Just like, Rah! And I'm like, oh, wow. I like seeing Rey evil. It's like, oh, she's not a perfect human being anymore. She's not a perfect saintly Jedi. She's potentially very evil. I think that's really good. And since she's a Palpatine with lightning force powers... did I mention Chewie's not really dead? They end up getting him back later. I don't quite remember how. Oh yeah, I mentioned all that. That was their escape and all that, and Hux helped them. Evil Rey, good thing, interesting. So Ben's freaking dead. He's dying, and he's stuck somewhere through the abdomen. And then Rey, we've established, set up and payoff, that she has force healing powers, and that's what she does. And it's not right away. Every time this force healing thing happens, it's not like magical, oh, you're healed. It's like the music and the looks on their faces is enough to let you believe, if you're watching it for the first time, I think, that maybe it won't work. And after we saw episode 8, nothing worked in that movie. So maybe the force healing isn't going to work either. and we're prepared for that, but it ends up working, and so it feels good and satisfying. And we're starting to like Ben. No, what's his name? It's not Skywalker, Solo. Kylo Ren. We're starting to like him a little bit anyway, so I thought that worked. She saves him, and then they kind of like, well, now what the heck do we do? She walks off somewhere. She gives him back the red lightsaber, and she walks off the blue lightsaber. Don't remember where she goes next, but what's interesting, in the next time we see Kylo, he's just kind of standing there looking out into the torrent waves, and then we hear a familiar voice, and it's Han Solo, and I'm like, oh, I thought this might happen. I heard it in the rumors. He's not a Force ghost, however. Just to help us understand, and I like this, so we don't get too mad, Kylo says, you're just a memory to him. And Han Solo says, yes, I am. Now, what's interesting in this whole dialogue, I really liked it because it was repeating a lot of the things that were said on the bridge at the end of Episode 7, where he kills Han Solo. Even line for line, some of the things are taken right from that as an echo. It's almost like the dark side version, the Kylo Ren, was speaking in Episode 7, and now in Episode 9 it's Ben Solo who's saying these things in a different way. It's light outside, so it's meant to reflect these things quite a bit. And he says, I know what I have to do, but I don't know if I can do it. And then he looks away from Han Solo, and he throws his evil red lightsaber out into the ocean, and we don't see that again. I guess that was the hard thing he had to do, or maybe it was to come back to the light, which is what he ends up doing for the rest of the movie. Leia died, and she doesn't disappear, though. They wait for the end for that, and let's just skip everything else and get to the ending. So, the remains of the Resistance, led by now General Poe, because he's in charge after Leia's passing, they go to they end up finding a way that through clever and complicated machinations, which I don't remember how they happened, they get to the evil Sith planet, which is Exegol, I think I remember it, and so many things happen in this movie. And they get there, and then the giant fleet apparently is still not launching, and they just have to get there in time and destroy a control tower before the fleet goes away. Okay, that's fine. Good enough. It's like, oh, I'm afraid this station will be fully operational at the end of Jedi. Return of the Jedi, that is. So those kinds of contrived things, or they're trying to fight and destroy the thing before the thing happens, and then the thing happens, and I get it. That's fine. That's Star Warsy. And I care about these characters more now, thanks to the first part of this movie, which is again just crammed with all these character development things, to again make up for how poorly Episode 8 did with developing the characters. It's interesting enough, and with the most interesting part is always the Kylo and Rey stuff. So Rey gets there, finds Palpatine, and Palpatine's a little bit zombie-like and skeletal. Who knows exactly how his body was reanimated, and but he tells Rey that his whole plan was to bring you here. Oh yes, and sometime before this is when Rey went to Luke's islands and burned the TIE fighter, and then I don't know why she would do that, because then she's stranded there. Was that her plan? And then threw her Luke's lightsaber into the fire. Luke's Force Ghost catches it, talks with her. Good Force Ghost. Actually sounds like Luke. Talks like him. And so this is really good and pleasant, and I really liked all of that. And the part at the end I really liked is, of course, since Force Ghosts can interact with the real world quite a lot, apparently, we see the setup, which was given to us, of Luke's X-Wing, which was buried, submerged under the water. In Episode 8, he raises it out of the water. He lifts it with his Force powers. Of course, he's a Force Ghost, so why not? And fairly effortlessly, too. We remember how in Empire, he wasn't able to do that. So this is a reference to that. There's a lot of these little things where things are getting paid off and completed, and it's like poetry. It rhymes. Oh yes, I know I'm backtracking. Before they go off onto the mission to try to get to Exegol, they talk about who was it? It was the Hobbit guy. So the Hobbit guy, oh gosh, was it Mary or Pippin? I think it was Mary, who ends up being in Lost, the other J.J. Abrams famous thing. I can't remember the name of that actor or the Lost Names character, but he is in this as just some rebellion resistance guy who's on the team in the control center. I think he's the one who says, well, why don't we just pull the Holdo maneuver, which Holdo apparently invented. And then Poe responds, that was a 1 in a million. So we get that explained too, because it should not have been introduced in episode 8 without that kind of like, I can't believe Holdo did that. Normally, when you go into hyperspace, you would never make contact with anything because it happens so quickly. But she was such a good pilot or whatever, or she was able to make that happen. And that's given some lip service here. So that was good. And while that happens, there's a montage. Yeah, it's all right. And there's, I got flashbacks from Independence Day where President Pullman is saying, we will not go gently into that good night. Or whatever. It was okay. And it was both Poe and Finn speechifying. It was pretty good. So, Rey gets all of the good guys that are around to go and attack this fleet thing. We see the horses. The way that work, that's the ground force. But they're not on the ground. So they're inside an atmosphere, which is why this works, and they have plenty of breathable oxygen apparently on this planet, and they're running on the outside of the destroyer or wherever they are, and it's a bunch of action, and it seems to make sense when you're watching it. My memory doesn't seem to tell me that, but I don't really care about any of that. What I care about is what's happening between Rey and Palpatine. Palpatine says, "Kill me, and my spirits will come to possess yours." And just like my energy and life force will go into you. And that's great. That's like, oh, okay. But everything there, this seemed super rushed. I like what they did as a concept. I don't think the logical sequence of it made sense, because why would Palpatine just expect her to come to the dark side? For someone who's been pulling the strings from beyond the grave for 30 years, he doesn't really, or 40, how long has it been? He doesn't really seem to understand what's about to happen. Because when Rey then, she's trying to resist all this craziness, when suddenly she perceives through Force sense that Ben has arrived too. And he's coming to try to help, try to save her. Or try to, I don't know what his plan is, but he's going to help. And he's on the way in, and he has to fight some Knights of Ren, I think. And he does it entirely without a lightsaber, just with Force block and all Force push and all those fun little maneuvers. And he does all that. Rey, meanwhile, is, so he's saying, and Palpatine's like, yes, and then take the lightsaber. And then there's this weird crowd of, I think, clones of Palpatine. When they're all cloaked, you don't see them, any of their faces, but they're all chanting, and it sounds like Sith language. It sounds good. I like this. It's entertaining. And why were we seeing the power of teleportation through the Force? So that as, I forget which lightsaber, she must be holding, right, she's holding right now Luke's lightsaber, and she's pretending to kill, or about to be killing, the body of Palpatine before his spirit enters her, like Ghostbusters 2. And then as she turns it off, and then Ben is able to take it from her through their telepathic ability. You understand this is happening from the language of cinema, which I think is pretty good. He then has it, and is able to defeat the Knights of Ren, I assume they're Knights of Ren, that are guarding the entrance, so that he's able to get in, be right next to Rey in a few minutes, and they're able to deal with Palpatine together. Then she takes out the lightsaber of Leia. Because when we were with Luke on Luke's island, we get this backstory that, Leia was in Jedi training the whole time. And there's this really nice little flashback where we see the CGI face of young Luke and young Leia sparring together. I thought that was really nice. It was also done well because it was in intense shadow at night, I believe. And because of that, it made the CGI look a lot better. The Leia's face still looked a little plasticky, but Carrie Fisher, rest her soul, looked kind of like that in life anyway. The final scene here, the full final duel, is pretty good. Kylo is helping quite a bit. Palpatine observes, Dyad, your life force, I want to eat it. And what he's able to do is then suck out a lot of their life force. And all this is pretty moving because it's creepy. It reminds you of The Princess Bride. And all of that is good. And he's able to then regenerate physical flesh on his body. He's looking more energy and all that. Ben he gets up first, and Palpatine force kicks him off a cliff, and he ends up coming back later. Rey ends up, then she ends up she looks like she's dead, but then she seems to get up again. After these voices of Jedi, including Samuel L. Jackson, Yoda, all these voices, Luke, Leia, you hear all of them kind of speaking to her. It's either real or it's either from memory or imagination, all talking to her saying, we are all the Jedi and we're behind you, we're with you. And this is while Palpatine is saying, all the Sith are in me. I am all of them. And then so that's the kind of contrast of all the Sith versus all the Jedi is there all in that one moment. So in a way, I suppose, all 9 movies are leading to this point. And she acquits herself well. She has both lightsabers, and he's trying to force lightning at her, and she's deflecting with the lightsabers. And, oh gosh, how does she finally get him? I'm trying to remember. Somehow she's able to reflect his own force lightning back on his face, kind of like what happened in the end of Revenge of the Sith, where his face gets all messed up, except not only does it get messed up, it gets all torn apart and vaporized. And he loses. So I guess when Palpatine got struck down, his life force ended up not going into Rey after all. Oh, well, we call that a plot hole. It's just like, okay. Oh, it also destroys the throne. There's a great big Iron Throne looking thing there, which gets destroyed Game of Thrones dragon style. And it's better than Gangnam style. And then Rey collapses because they were both near death from that life-sucking thing. Ben comes over to her now and he cradles her, and it's just kind of goes on for a few minutes where her eyes are wide open. She's dead. She's totally dead. And he's able to revive her in the same force power way. And at that moment, though, Kylo ends up collapsing, and then he disappears in a Jedi style. And then we see that Leia's body disappears too at the same time, as if they were connected. So this is a redemption arc for Kylo. I mean, it's hard to imagine Kylo, for all the evil things he did, to be, truly a good person and a Jedi again. It's not like, it was all about a dream. Whereas, even though Rey was super potentially evil and was doing some not great stuff with the dark side, she was, she hasn't really done a lot of truly terrible things. And therefore, it works out. It works out. It's okay. Also, it was a heroic sacrifice on Kylo's part. People have complained that we don't see a lot of chivalry kind of opportunities for male characters to be able to do things that are heroic or sacrificial. This is one of them. He gave his life for her. It felt like a little bit like Romeo and Juliet, or Mark Antony and Cleopatra, something like that. I thought it was fitting. And after that, we see Ewoks. I'm pretty sure I saw Ewoks on Endor, and they see something crashing. I'm like, wait, what are they seeing? Like, is it a Star Destroyer falling? And then another Star Destroyer is falling onto Jakku? I'm like, why is this a reference to episode 1 where all the droid ships just collapse because the control strip is destroyed? What's going on? So we go back to the rebel base in the forest, wherever that is, and everyone's hugging and like, oh, and yay, and all that's nice. Poe sees his ex-girlfriend. We never see her face, just her eyes we saw in one brief scene earlier. And everyone's kind of like getting together, and Poe kind of nods in her direction. She's like, nope, shakes her head, and that's cute. I liked that bit of comedy. It was reasonably well placed, especially for those characters, because that semi-sarcastic relationship was established for both of them right away. That worked. Oh yeah, something else. So Lando is there at the end too. Some minutes before he comes, it's the second time he is seen here, he comes into the battle right as everything is looking most dire, and he brings about 1 million civilian ships with him, and they're able to, which are armed with cannons and things, and they're able to attack and distract the Star Destroyers while Rey is trying to destroy Palpatine. Oh yeah, there's this great moment where Palpatine gets super powerful, and he uses all of his Force lightning to just absolutely destroy both his own Star Destroyers and the Rebel Resistance spacecraft at the same time, and they're all falling. It looked really good. Now, I know a lot of this doesn't sound like it makes sense and is crazy, because it was, and I can't believe I actually told you all of it that I could remember. There's a lot that's in it. It had to do a lot of damage control, and I think it probably ended up as good as it possibly might have, given what Episode 8 gave them to work with. They made a lot of decisions that were satisfying. The biggest problem is the misplaced comedy. Why? It's just that if that were taken out, if we had an edited version where the quips were removed, I think it would be a better movie. Music was great. Musical motifs for all the characters. The Leia motif, the Han Solo music. We have the Star Wars or Luke theme, which is used very well and appropriately, as well as the theme of the Force. All these, the Kylo has his own theme as well as Rey. The visual motifs, the musical light motifs. It's about as good, I think, as it could get. It's an okay movie. To end this trilogy, well, I'd say this one movie is better than anything that was in the prequels, for sure. At least that's how I feel about it. And, yeah. Go Star Wars. Thanks for listening. I'm Luke, and this is Skywalker.